I've already talked about the online modes of Splatoon 1 and how much I love them, but I left out the rest of what the game offers in that video. Normally I'd go over everything I want to talk about in a game at once, but I felt that the online content features enough to make its own video, so today I'll be talking about what many people consider the training mode in Splatoon. So here's where my lacking knowledge of the shooting genre will come into play, because I have no idea if the modern era of these games are designed with the multiplayer in focus, or if the single player is. And the main reason for this is because most shooting games have a story mode to play alone, but I can't say I've heard anyone talk about them. Like, I know the HiJello games have a bunch of books about the world's lore, but on the Nintendo island with locked borders that I live on, HiJello has always been a multiplayer game to me, and Splatoon is not much different. Except I'm gonna bust a load talking about Splatoon's lore. So the story in Splatoon is that the great Zapfish that acts as Singopolis' source of power has been stolen in the blink of an eye, and nobody seems to care. I mean, they really don't have to worry since the power never actually goes out, but that's because this is obviously the work of David Copperfield, and if you choose to pursue Mr. Copperfield, there's an old man peeking out of a sewer that takes you to Octo Valley, which may be where the great Zapfish is hiding. UFOs are also mentioned, which never made sense, and there's teapots underground, and everything's floating. You just learn to accept game aesthetics at some point. So the old man we followed is Captain Cuttlefish, who non-consensually makes you join the agency, but since it's the agency, I mean, we're peaking in life right now. But he's quite positive that the Octarians stole the great Zapfish, so we're just gonna take some lives all because a senile war vet said so. Now, instead of immediately going into the gameplay loop or level design, I just want to talk about how much Splatoon reminds me of Super Mario Sunshine and Galaxy, because there's too many similarities between these games, and low-key, I just want to talk about Mario some more. So if you played Super Mario Sunshine, which chances are you probably have now, you'll quickly see how it's the antithesis to Splatoon, since you're removing ink in Sunshine but placing it in Splatoon. Plus you wear the tank on your back, and the game has a paintbrush weapon. There's too many similarities for this to be a coincidence, and since Splatoon was getting content updates every week, it made so much sense for there to be Mario Sunshine content, like a flood gun, or a magic paintbrush skin for the ink brush, or even a Mario vs. Shadow Mario Splatfest where the Mario team gets to shoot water to clean the ink. You guys have no idea how badly I want this crossover to happen. It would be a dream come true. And as for Super Mario Galaxy, Splatoon reminds me of that game because the levels are literally levels from Galaxy. You jump from floating island to floating island, and there may not be sphere walking, but this is a launch star and you know it. And just making these comparisons makes me wish this game had sandbox type levels full of puzzles, because the framework for that type of game is here, but as I've said before, the story mode is designed to be a tutorial for the online modes. So let's reel myself back in and talk about the levels. One thing Splatoon really highlights for me is the modern day Nintendo level design. Gimmicks and hazards are typically exclusive to one or two levels, and as you progress through the level, their first appearance is in a controlled environment, where you can safely understand the gimmick before it gets used in more challenging sections. The sponge, for instance, is an obstacle that grows when you shoot it with ink, but shrinks when an enemy hits it. The first time you encounter it, you simply shoot it with ink so you can climb up to the next platform. Then enemies are added to show that they can affect the sponges too. These settings demonstrate how simple the sponge is before it's featured in locations where the sponge is your only platform while fighting enemies, since dodging attacks now means the sponge will shrink. This adds more urgency to enemy encounters, since they become stronger and can shrink the sponge quicker in later levels. And the reason I picked out this gimmick in particular is because it's one of the best examples of the story mode's level design being a tutorial for the online mode. The sponge's ability to shrink makes you play more aggressively to defend your turf, and when the sponges are small, it makes you realize how much more of an advantage you have offensively and defensively when you have more space to work with. More sponge, more funge. The levels also show you things like using the splat bomb and other sub-weapons. Now, I'm not saying the game does a bad job telling players there's a button on their controller that throws a grenade, but I am saying there's a button on your controller that throws a grenade, and if you don't start mixing it into your gameplay, you will forever remain a rookie. There's also little tutorials for the special weapons, like the Bubbler and Ink Zuka are featured in a few levels where there's a ton of strong enemies around, but specials like the Ink Strike and Killer Whale are attacks you get to practice avoiding instead. And if you have an extra $35 lying around, you can learn the Kraken. I'm actually going to talk about this later. I suppose I should finally talk about the levels now, and for as great as the game is, none of the levels really stand out to me. I can remember a level by its gimmick and maybe a few set pieces, but because of the Mario Galaxy-esque planets, I have a hard time remembering any specific level. Like, there's two levels where you go through grids full of these flutter enemies, but if you ask me what the other sections in these levels are, I can't say I remember what they looked like. Now, if you asked me to describe a 2D Mario level 2 weeks after I played it, I'd probably be just as stumped, but I think Splatoon suffers from these design woes more because there are fewer things to do in each level. There are some levels that do stand out from the rest though, and that's because they're the maps from the online modes. Is this a common thing shooting games do in their story modes? Hey, I mean, if it fits the tutorial narrative. You mainly go from one spawn to another, but the levels are typically full of strong enemies that make these some of the more challenging levels in the game. Some of these maps weren't even available to play online at launch, so it was cool anticipating when Kelp Dome and Bluefin Depot would be added, is what I would say, but I bought Splatoon after those maps were patched in. I do want to give a special mention to Urchin Underpass, since that map was redesigned before I bought the game, but the story mode still uses the original version. In my video about the online modes, I said Urchin Underpass is my third least favorite map, and I can guarantee that it would have been number one if it never got patched, because every room in this map is tiny. This looks like the CEO of Spawn Camping designed it. Splatoon also has boss fights. Once every level in a world is clear, there's a boss to scrap with. The fights do a fine job at diversifying the experience, like having to quickly climb a wall in the first one and needing to cover a large amount of turf for the third one. But I've always wondered why these bosses are all mechanical. It seems like they're just mechs being operated by hentai bait, but what's going on with the tentacle to face surface area ratio? I know there's enemies that are just tentacle stubs, but this isn't adding up. And the final boss goes around in a mech too, but this time we get to see their entire body. This is DJ Octavio. I don't know why he's a DJ and the leader of the Octarians, just deal with it. Apparently he led his troops in the Great Turf War against Captain Cuttlefish, but for 100 years old, this guy's looking pretty swole compared to Mr. Skin and Bones over there. And this boss fight takes forever. They decided it was a good idea to have 100 phases where the only difference is that your platform gets smaller in each zone and that you have to react slightly faster each time. One thing about this boss that stands out to me are the sunglasses on the pineapple looking attacks. I never noticed them until my third playthrough, and now I can't stop thinking about them. And the way to beat Octavio is with the power of music, because that's fresh as fuck! Obviously it's showing the Mary Sue sisters since they were blander than a cod, but that's all I've got to say about the story mode. I like these types of games where the story is an accessory to the gameplay, because the second it starts to take itself seriously is the second I start to criticize it. That's why hiding all the lore and collectibles is the best way to tell your story. Sunken Scrolls are hidden in every single level, and when they're collected, an illustration about the world of Splatoon along with a short description is unlocked. Some of these are related to the Great Turf War, showing Captain Cuttlefish and DJ Octavio when they were younger. A couple show what the shopkeepers Annie, Mo, and Krusty Sean are based on. There's a little bit of backstory for the Squid Sisters' rise to stardom and the opening measures to their song Calamari Incantation. Judd the Cat has a crazy backstory, being one of the last survivors of a world populated by humans. And there's a picture of a human skeleton playing a Wii U with a Wii remote strapped to a Pro Controller, which Nintendo themselves have promoted as the definitive way for a second player to participate in the Battle Dojo mode. Imagine dying playing Wii U. My favorite scrolls are the ones imitating art, like this Adam and Eve mock-up featuring the Octarians, and the March of Progress showing the evolution of the squid into the Inkling. But my favorite one is this parody of the Voyager Golden Record. If you ask me what any of the symbols on the record mean, I wouldn't be able to tell you much, but I've heard enough about it over the years that this is conceptually one of the coolest things in the world, and the fact that Splatoon references it makes me appreciate the thought that went into the world building of this game even more. There's also a tiny flip note in the bottom right corner featuring a Zapfish, Judd, and Sheldon. There's just so much love put into these scrolls that these are one of the only collectibles in a video game where I actually want to find all of them instead of collecting everything for OCD purposes. And the bosses give you scrolls too, but these contain blueprints for new weapons that can be used online. The most notable to me is the Arrow Spray, which I recall dominated the Turf War metagame in the early months due to its fast and thorough fire rate. The only other weapon unlocked from the story mode I care about is the Kelp Splat Charger, which features the Sprinkler and Killer Whale, a combo that excels in my favorite mode, Rainmaker. The last thing I want to talk about are the Splatoon amiibo. 5 amiibo were released featuring an Inkling Girl, Inkling Boy, Squid, Callie, and Marie. The Inkling Boy and Girl were sold individually, but the Squid was only available in the States through a 3-pack. And then a year later, the exact same amiibo were re-released with a paint swap, so if you own both 3-packs, you're an idiot. When the Inkling Girl amiibo is scanned, a bunch of levels from the story mode can be played with the sniper. And because I started to use the Splat Charger a lot, I thought it would be fun to play the levels. If anything, the Splat Charger makes every level easier due to its incredible range, but most of the boss fights were greater challenges since they can tank fully charged shots. If you complete every level, you unlock a new skin for the default Splat Charger, a set of student-themed gear, and the Squidball arcade game. With the Inkling Boy amiibo, you get roller challenges, and the unlockables are a new roller skin, samurai gear, and the Squid Racer arcade game. And last of the trio is the Squid amiibo, which unlocks the Splattershot skin, robot gear, and the Squid Beats arcade game that doubles as a way to listen to the Splatoon soundtrack. The Callie and Marie amiibo were sold as a set, and all they do is put Inkopolis in Splatfest mode while giving you special concerts to watch. If these amiibo let you play the online maps with their nighttime Splatfest appearances too, I would have bought these in a heartbeat. And while I didn't buy the 3-pack either, I did get the Squid amiibo for Splatoon 2, which is compatible with this game. And instead of playing levels with a splat charger or roller, you get a mix of levels where you play as a Kraken and levels where you have limited ink. The Kraken levels are really fun to speed through since you're invincible and can insta-kill most enemies. I had a lot of fun plowing through obstacles while platforming as a Kraken, and if you guys know any other games like this, let me know in the comments because that's how much I like this mode. And then the levels with limited ink are a great way to add a hard mode to the game. Having the limit added a lot of strategy with every enemy and obstacle I encountered, like the sponges don't have to be their largest size to progress, so I made sure to optimize my ink consumption on those. And the level with invisible floors added a lot of tension when I'd waste ink towards the end trying to guess where the floor is. Amiibo have always been in a tough spot since they provide new content, but usually when they do, it makes me wish it was in the base game, because while I think the Squid Amiibo content is amazing, it only takes an hour to complete. And for something that's $13, potentially even $35, I have a hard time seeing the value for what you get. But if you're a weirdo with a foot fetish, the Amiibo got you covered for one frame. And since we're still on the topic of Amiibo, you might be wondering about those arcade games I said they unlock. Well, when you're waiting for the matchmaker during online matches, the Wii U game has a minigame on it you can play. It's called Squid Jump, and I'm sure we've all played or seen a game like this before, but one thing you may not have known is that auxiliary games during loading screens like this were patented by Namco between 1995 and 2015, so Splatoon is one of the only games out there with this type of feature, since most games these days load too fast for an auxiliary game to be worth including, or they do that thing where you walk in a tunnel and a map loads while you pass through it. For my amiibo, I have Squidball and Squid Beats unlocked. Squidball is a volleyball spiking game, and it's usually the one I'll play between matches, since I'm trying to get my masters in Jellyfish Annihilation. Squid Beats is Donkey Konga, but there's no combo tracker or score system. And if you want to get dizzy, you can turn on hard mode and watch as inputs only the 1% can perfectly input blur past your vision. So that's it for Splatoon. I know I left out the Battle Dojo, but that's because it's bad. But overall, Splatoon is my favorite game on the Wii U. Most of my enjoyment for the game comes from the online modes, which you can hear me talk about in the video on the left. But the single player has a lot of charm and simplicity I like to see in Nintendo games. Now please just give me a Splatoon and Mario crossover that isn't Smash Bros. Thanks for watching the video, I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to leave a like as well if the channel grows, and subscribe to get updates on my uploads as soon as they happen. But until then, I will see you all next time.